Sistral here with a quick deck tech on the Tezzerator deck I've been playing lately in Modern. I've always been a really big fan of the Thopter Foundry Sword of the Meek combo in Modern ever since they unbanned it. It's had some issues with being very good, but it's a lot of fun, I find. So I've always wanted to play it and been trying to find the best home for it ever since Sword of the Meek was finally unbanned. I've also been a big fan of Tezzerator Agent of Bolas for a while. I've tried some Tezzerator decks in the past, and found them to be a lot of fun, but not super effective. And the big standout that I find really helped push this deck over the edge was the printing of War of Invention. Allowing you to tutor up your artifacts at instant speed has been pretty great. So I found this version of the deck online. I can't remember who I saw play first, but I've been following the MTG Salvation thread and a bunch of people talking, playing the deck there, and it helped. They helped me find. They gave me the idea, or I took the idea from them to play this sort of, as they call it, Turbo Tezzerator version with a lot of zero drops. Which includes the 4 Mishra's Bauble, 3 Mox Opals, and 2 Welding Jars, and 20 lands. So that forms a lot of the base of the deck and helps. All those zero drops help really speed out War of Invention. Another big plus for War of Invention is the Pentad Prism. It works a lot better than other mana artifacts as far as War of Invention goes, because on turn 2 you can play it for 2 counters. Turn 3 you play a land, and now between your 3 lands, 2 counters on Prism, and being able to tap Prism as well for Improvise lets you, with no other artifacts in play, whir for 3 on turn 3, which is pretty great. So obviously the core of the deck is basically 4 or 5 cards. It's the Thopter Sword combo, which if you're not familiar with it, when you get them both in play, you pay 1 colorless to sacrifice, or 1 generic mana, sacrifice a non-token artifact, creates a 1/1 blue flying Thopter artifact creature, and you gain 1 life. So the idea is you sacrifice Sword of the Meek, which goes to the graveyard, and Sword of Meek has a triggered ability. Whenever a 1/1 creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may return Sword of the Meek from your graveyard to the battlefield and attach it. So that means you sacrifice it to make a 1/1, the 1/1 triggers Sword of the Meek comes back attached to the 1/1, you sacrifice it again, and so on. So it's basically, when you get them online, 1 mana of any type gets you a 1/1 flying creature and 1 life. So it's really hard for any creature-based deck to come back from that, because every turn you're making usually at least 4 Thopters, so you can block, just chump block anything, gang up and block something larger. You still got lots of guys to attack with in the air. There's not a lot of stuff that stops that. Even if they wipe your board, because you can activate this at instant speed, you just end of their turn, refill it with Thopters, and just go nuts. Another major part of this deck is Ensnaring Bridge. It basically functions kind of as the removal in this deck, and Whir lets you tutor it up. And it's pretty great because, again, against any creature-based strategy, we tend to, with playing all these 1-drops and 0-drops, we don't have a lot of expensive cards, so we're dumping our hand relatively fast, and it means they can't attack. And then what we can do is we can draw, hold that card in hand, attack with all of our Thopters, except for the one that has the sword on it, and then play our card, and now no creatures can attack again. So we still get to attack with our 1/1s in the air, but they can't ever attack with any of their creatures once the engine's really online and we've dumped our entire hand. War of Invention is obviously another backbone piece, allowing you to instant speed, get the Ensnaring Bridge, get either half of the Thopter Swords combo, get any of our utility artifacts, which in the main is basically Pithing Needle or Relic of Progenitus. Both have a lot of utility and a lot of matchups. Relic, a lot of graveyard decks. Death Shadow, it's quite good against, because you can use its tap ability to chew through their graveyard to empty it for delves. They can't really delve all that effectively. against Living End or Dredge, obviously exiling their whole graveyard is great. And worst case scenario, you can play it and then pay 1 and exile it to exile the graveyards and draw a card. We don't really use our graveyard other than the Thopter Sword combo, so it's very easy to not really cost us anything to exile all of our graveyard. Pithy Needle is another good utility artifact in the main. Great to tutor up, stops planeswalkers, stops weird things in the main like Kazali Pride Mage from killing your artifacts, your bridge, or your combo. Stops Scavenging Ooze from eating the Sword of the Meek, things like that. So it's a really good utility card to have in the main, especially when you can tutor it up at instant speed. We got the Baubles, as I was mentioning before. They're kind of just draw spells, but they also power up both Mox Opal, Whir of Invention. You can occasionally turn them into 5/5s with Tezzeret, Agent, and Bolus. So they're pretty solid. Mox Opal, pretty self-explanatory. Welding Jars have been actually really good. They're both 0-drops to power up Whir, Mox Opal, and the Regenerate ability is pretty relevant against Kazali Pride Mage or sideboard, Abrupt Decays, Maelstrom Pulses, Ancient Grudges, things like that. Anything people are doing to kill our artifacts. Sometimes those things end up in the main, so Welding Jar is great, and otherwise it's great in the post-board. Seer Vision's obviously really good. We're playing a lot of blue sources. Really good to fix our draws. Inquisition, been pretty decent for me. I don't love it here. I might try changing it to something else, but it's hard to go too wrong with Inquisition right now. Collective Brutality, same thing. Very solid card. Great against burn. Acts as removal or discard or both. Also helps us discard extra cards to be empty-handed for Ensnaring Bridge a bit faster. Thopter Sword and Prism Bridge I've already talked about. Tezzerator is also a pretty great card in this deck. I find I don't actually make 5/5s very often. The reason for that is most of the times if I do, it opens up any removal spells they have, which are otherwise pretty blanked. Using Path or Fatal Push on a Thopter token is not really something you're worried about, but losing one of your artifacts to Path or Fatal Push does kind of suck when you've minus Tezzeret, but on occasion it is pretty useful to provide a blocker for Tezzeret. You can make a Flying Thopter and do a 5/5, things like that. Most of the time, I tend to just +1, search for another artifact to put into play. A real way you can win with this deck is if you ever get into some sort of stalemate situation or post-board against a Stony Silence. Tezzeret can really shine because it allows you to hide behind a bridge, build up a whole bunch of artifacts just by playing them, and then -4 to drain life for double the amount of artifacts you have. Kills them very fast. And if they don't have something like Stony Silence, if you get Thopter Sword online and Tezzeret out, you end the game super quick because the Thopters are going to basically protect your Tezzeret. He's going to tick up to 4. On your turn, you can just spend all your mana, make a bunch of Thopters, and at that point, you've probably easily got enough for lethal damage with his -4, which happens almost immediately. So, really good utility card. I used to have 4, did cut him down to 3, saw a bunch of other people doing it too, been really happy with that. 4 mana is a little slow a lot of the time, so I'm usually much more excited to get, to see the Thopter Foundry, Sword of the Meek, or Ensnaring Bridge, or Whir. Those are cards I tend to want to see a lot more often than Tezzeret, but especially in post-board as ways to beat Stony Silence, it's really, really good. Mana base is relatively simple. Inventor's Fair is quite good. Gains you life, occasionally lets you search for an artifact if you need it, so it's a good utility card to have. We are playing a lot of blue sources, obviously, because Whir of Invention does cost 3 blue, and Improvise can't reduce the blue cost at all. So we're playing a fair number of blue sources with the Darkslick Shores. The Breeding Pool and the Steam Vents and the Spires are there for sideboard cards I'll get to in a minute. But you will see we are kind of post-board a 5-color deck, so they help. The Spires have been really good for that. Most of our deck, a lot of it is colorless. so you don't really have to pay life very often, but you've almost always got artifacts to allow you to make colored mana with it whenever you need it. So it's a good catch-all there. So between the Spires and the Opals and then your Breeding Pool and Steam Vents, you've generally got enough colored mana to cast any of your splash cards. So that's pretty much the main deck. Our strategy again is basically just get an Ensnaring Bridge down, a Thopter Sword combo online, and kill them that way. Tezzerator alternate win condition as well. So going to the sideboard here, we've got a lot of cards to help shore up weaknesses with the deck. Combo can be an issue, so especially Storm. So we've got the Canonist, quite good against Storm. Also the Trinisphere is another item there that's mainly there for Storm. Both of these being artifacts are great because we can whir for them. And as I was saying before, the Opal and the Spire make paying the white mana for Canonist not really that difficult. And I don't think it's worth it to play another, Hallowed Fountain or something just for the Canonist. So, been pretty solid. Not really great against anything other than Storm, but Storm is fairly popular, so I've quite liked having them around. A Thoughtseize for, again, combo matchups. Been pretty decent. Another Collective Brutality, again, good as if we need extra removal for small guys like Counters Company. Discard Spell, amazing against Burn. Flaying Tendrils, mainly there for Counters Company, but also good versus Affinity. Being able to exile things is pretty useful. Lost Legacy is another anti-combo card. Just pretty simple. Don't love it, but kind of like having it around. Damnation for any creature decks. Herald of Anguish is an interesting one. I haven't really played with it too much, but I've seen lots of other people, talking about him being pretty good. He's mostly there for grindy mid-range decks, which with Jund and Abzan kind of being on the outs, it might be worth just taking this guy out and swapping him for something else. But occasionally it is nice to have a reasonably cheap flying 5/5, and his ability is fairly relevant, especially if you get Thopter Sword online. Going over here to the artifacts, again, these are just more utility artifacts. Relic, Pithing Needle I've already talked about. Grafdigger's Cage is there for very similar reasons as Relic. Also good versus Counters Company. Really like having extra copies of all these cards to bring in where it's relevant in post-board, and they're great because they're very easy to tutor for with Whir of Invention. So you can sometimes do things like if they cast a Collected Company or a Court of Calling, you can, at instant speed, tap 3 blue and an artifact and put a Grafdigger's Cage and kind of get them that way. One really fun thing to do that I've only been able to do once is if someone casts Madcap Experiment, to post-board be able to, in response, whir for a Grafdigger's Cage, and it often just kills them on the spot because they have to resolve it. They find their Platinum Empyrean, but they can't put it into play because the Grafdigger's Cage, so they take a whole bunch of damage and die. So unfortunately, that combo is not really played very much because it's a really fun way to kill them. The last 4 cards are cards that I find come in very frequently. Aether Grid is great because we play so many artifacts. You've seen it in Affinity, here for a very similar reason, there to beat Stony Silence. Tezzerator also does it, but Aether Grid is another alternative way to beat Stony Silence pretty effectively. Against other matchups like Affinity, it's also pretty good just to kill their creatures if you run into Infect or Counters Company. Still a good card to bring in. I bring it in a lot, especially against pretty much any deck that has white mana in it. You can guess there's a good chance Stony Silence is coming in, so you want to bring it in. And even against other decks, it can still be very good to sideboard into kind of an Aether Grid control strategy. Only downside is you can't tutor it up and you can't get it with Tezzerator. Abrupt Decay and Maelstrom Pulse. I kind of go back and forth on if I like Maelstrom Pulse more or Abrupt Decay more. I've kind of been enjoying the split. I might change it at some point to 2 Pulse, 1 Abrupt Decay, because Abrupt Decay doesn't hit Leyline of the Void, which, with Dredge being somewhat popular, you do see on occasion. Not too worried because Leyline does shut down the Thopter Foundry Sword of the Meat combo, but you can always still win with Tezzerator or Aether Grid. So it's not a huge deal, but having Maelstrom Pulse to kill that is good. Both of them kill Stony Silences, Rest in Pieces. These are two common things that people will bring in against you that do cause you a lot of headaches. They're completely beatable thanks to Aether Grid, Tezzerator, things like that, and Bridge buying you a ton of time, but they are a real pain. So bring them in is good, and just extra removal is basically always good. So I find these 4 cards do come in probably more than anything else in this deck. So I think that's everything. That's an overview of the deck, and I'm going to get to a league very shortly.